I've signed the final papers. The Grand Citadel project needs a partner of substance, not a liability. And you, my dear Clara, are simply a peasant who outlived her usefulness. My husband, Senator Rexford Hale, declared, his voice booming over the microphone at his own political fundraiser. This was his latest, most vicious scheme, a public, preemptive humiliation designed to destroy my credibility and force me into a quiet, penniless settlement, ensuring I wouldn't dare contest his imminent billion-dollar real estate venture. He expected me to collapse, to sob into the antique lace he'd once mocked me for wearing, or to beg him, a woman with nowhere to go. But I just smiled. Of my expression, a sheet of polished ice. What Rexford? The arrogant man who believed he was a political genius. I didn't know was that I had anticipated this exact moment, this exact party. And his fatal miscalculation was not the divorce itself, but the land he was standing on right now. I am Clara Vance, though for the past 8 years, I have been known only as Clara Hale, the senator's simple wife, the country bumpkin from a backwoods coastal town, the charity lunch filler. I've known for over a year he was systematically funneling funds toward his fiancée, Veronica, and planning this grand exit. But I stayed for one reason: to protect my father's legacy, the land he loved. Rexford believed my late father, Andrew Vance, was just a small-time developer who left me a quaint, useless waterfront cabin and nothing more. I remember the day 2 years ago when Rexford needed $5 million to pay off a campaign debt that would have ruined his career. I had offered him one of the few assets I had on hand, my entire personal emergency fund, painstakingly saved from my mother's estate, $65,000 to keep him afloat. While I was draining that account, sacrificing my only safety net, Rexford had patted my hand, using vive flattery, telling me, "You are so sweet, Clara." But that tiny sum won't even cover Veronica's shoe budget. He had mocked my small contribution, never knowing that the source of that money was the sale of just one single, tiny sliver of Vance Trust stock. A stock he didn't know existed, and a trust that was secretly the largest private real estate holding in the entire state. The humiliation of having my sacrifice dismissed as pocket change was the moment I stopped loving him and started preparing the trap. I realized then that my endurance was not for him, but for the justice that only I could deliver. My fingers gripped the small, sealed manila envelope inside my clutch. This was not a sentimental object. It was the mechanism of his destruction. Rexford had finally finished his brutal monologue, which had involved mocking my rustic taste and my inability to understand the complexity of the financial world. He stood at the podium, bathed in the spotlight, looking triumphant, expecting my public collapse. His mother, Camilla, sat stiffly in the front row, already looking past me toward Veronica, Rexford's sleek, cruel fiancée. And so, Rexford concluded, lifting a champagne flute to the room filled with investors and political allies. I raise a toast to my new life, free from the burdensome weight of. I didn't let him finish the toast. My calm was an armor he couldn't penetrate. Congratulations on your honesty, Rexford. I interrupted, my voice perfectly pitched to carry through the stunned silence. Every eye in the room was on me. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked toward him, one measured step after another, my back straight, my gaze fixed on his. He was momentarily thrown off. He expected hysteria, not composure. Clara, dear, this is hardly the time for. I ignored the patronizing tone. I placed the small manila envelope on the podium right next to his champagne flute. The sound of the paper landing was impossibly loud. "What is this?" he asked, his triumphant expression faltering, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Something for you to read immediately." I replied. I didn't turn to the guests. I spoke only to him. It's not a divorce countersuit. I wouldn't bore this fine audience with something so common. Rexford hesitated. Then, eager to regain control of the room, he tore open the envelope. His eyes scanned the legal document inside, and the color drained from his face with terrifying speed. His political smile, the one that had won him 2 elections, vanished entirely. His jaw worked silently. The document was not a divorce paper. It was a notice of ownership claim against the very tract of land he was breaking ground on tomorrow. It was signed by the trustee of the Andrew Vance Irrevocable Land Trust and filed moments before the party began. Rexford had been so focused on proving I was a worthless housewife with no resources that he never checked the one asset he thought was too insignificant to matter: the original deed for the property I inherited from my father, which turned out to be the core 27-acre tract of the entire Grand Citadel development. He had mortgaged everything, his entire future, on land he did not legally own free and clear. His hands started to tremble, and he looked wildly at the crowd, then back at the paper. This is a mistake. This deed is invalid, he stammered, his voice losing its senatorial boom and cracking. I simply looked at him. You signed the construction contracts and secured the loan against the land. Rexford, now read the final paragraph. He scanned the bottom of the document, and a strangled sound escaped his throat. The final paragraph, meticulously crafted by my trust's legal team, stated that due to his public declaration of divorce, which violated an obscure fidelity clause in a prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on years ago, I was exercising my right as the trustee's representative to formally display the deed and seize immediate control of the disputed 27 acres until a formal title hearing could be scheduled. You can't do this to me, he screamed, dropping the flute. The fragile crystal shattered on the polished floor, a sound that finally broke the silence in the room. He looked less like a powerful senator and more like a ruined boy. The damage was instant and public. I watched as Mr. Partidet Thompson, the lead investment banker who was financing 90% of the Grand Citadel project, quietly excused himself and hurried toward the exit. Phone pressed to his ear. Rexford's political allies began to exchange nervous glances. His mother, Camilla, who had been sneering at me moments before, now stared at her son with naked, sudden fear. She knew that without Thompson's money, Rexford's career, and her own social standing, was over. He had been so preoccupied with humiliating the useless wife that he failed to notice the legal guillotine she was holding. I looked down at the shattered champagne flute. His downfall was beautiful and loud. I turned and walked away without another word, leaving Rexford screaming my name at the podium, surrounded by the wreckage of his arrogance and the sudden, ice-cold realization that the peasant he had dismissed as having no substance was about to foreclose on his entire future. My hands did not shake. My back remained straight. I waited for his screams to fade behind the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom. I know the pain of watching someone you love destroy everything you built while mocking the very foundation you laid. I know the sting of having your life's work, your sacrifice, called pocket change. I know the hollow dread that sets in when you realize your entire world was a carefully constructed lie built by a narcissist. But I promise you that humiliation is only the start of your victory. I have just served the first document. He thinks he can fight me and win. He thinks I'm finished. He has no idea what happens when a billionaire heiress decides to stop playing the simple wife. Rexford's screams were the soundtrack to my quiet drive home. I didn't listen to the substance of his rage. I listened to the sound of his narcissistic breakdown, which was music to my ears. He was frantic because Mr. Thompson, the lead investment banker, had already called his office to freeze the Grand Citadel's construction loan. Fearing the title dispute I initiated, the political fallout was immediate. Rexford, the master manipulator, was now panicking. And a panicking man is predictable and cruel. I knew his next move wouldn't be legal. It would be personal. He would attack the one thing he thought I cared about, the small, unpretentious waterfront cabin my father had left me. Rexford and his mother, Camilla, had always openly mocked the cabin, calling it a shack and peasant housing, believing it was the sum total of my inheritance and a sentimental weakness they could easily exploit. I remembered the cruel words of Camilla just 6 months prior. When I had suggested spending Christmas at the cabin, she had laughed. A high, sharp sound. That little wooden box, honestly. Clara. It smells like fish and desperation. Rexford is a senator. We need appropriate optics. You may enjoy your squalor, but we certainly won't indulge it. She had made my love for that cabin, which held the only happy memories I had of my father, sound like a character flaw, a flaw that proved I was unfit for their high society. While I was enduring her mockery and secretly working with the trust to transfer the final, crucial land deed into my name, Camilla was pressuring Rexford to use his political influence to seize the land around the cabin for marina expansion. A move she knew would hurt me personally. The contrast was always sickeningly brutal. While I was meticulously securing the deed, ensuring Rexford couldn't touch the real land, he was already plotting to take the sentimental land away from me. All while telling the media he was a devoted family man. I promised myself then that their contempt for my simple life would be the weapon I used to destroy them. They saw a weakness. I saw an armored stronghold. I hadn't been home for an hour before the expected attack arrived. A black sedan pulled up the gravel driveway, followed by a local sheriff's car. Camilla stepped out, looking furious and vindictive, flanked by a young, visibly uncomfortable sheriff. I met them on the porch. My breathing was even. My hands, resting on the wooden railing, did not shake. You can stop the theatrics. Clara. Camilla spat, shoving a legal document into my hand. Rexford needs this land for public access to his Grand Citadel site. This is a formal eviction notice. You have 24 hours to remove your meager belongings, or they will be catalogued and sold. Consider this my gift to the community, ridding it of an unwanted squatter. She was preening, expecting me to collapse, assuming the sight of the law on her side would make me compliant. The sheriff shifted his weight, looking at the charming, rustic cabin with a perplexed expression. Ma'am, the senator claims this is necessary for a new access road. Camilla glowed with narcissistic satisfaction. The law is the law. You can't fight progress. Clara, you're simply too unsophisticated to understand the zoning rules. Just as Rexford always said. She used his vile words, the ones that called me too uneducated to read a simple zoning map, to twist the knife. I scanned the eviction notice and the accompanying survey map attached to it. Rexford and Camilla were expecting my tears. They expected me to beg for more time. They didn't expect me to read. I smiled. A genuine, cold smile that startled Camilla. Rexford should have given you the original survey map. Camilla, this is a copy. It's a certified copy. She sneered. What difference does it make? All the difference, I replied. I used my finger to tap one single, almost imperceptible line on the map. It was a line that represented the precise boundary of a tiny, forgotten historical easement. My father, Andrew Vance, a master surveyor before he became a developer, had deliberately placed a 1-foot easement right here. A trick he taught me years ago that I had meticulously reinstated. This tiny line, I stated calmly, my voice teaching, not pleading, represents a historical easement reserved for a specific, non-motorized public use, a fishing path. Rexford's eviction notice claims the land is needed for a new access road, which involves heavy construction and motor traffic. That violates the terms of this specific easement. And more importantly, the eviction notice is based on the premise of clearing the entire structure. Since the easement runs under the northwest corner of the porch, this entire eviction notice is void on its face for technical violation of historical land use. Camilla's mouth opened and closed silently, her face flushing crimson. She couldn't believe the peasant had just found the needle in the hay. The young sheriff, whose eyes had widened as I spoke, pulled the documents back. He looked at the map, then back at Camilla, then at me. He ran a professional finger along the boundary line. Mrs. Hale is correct. Ma'am, the sheriff said to Camilla, his tone now respectful to me and coldly official toward her. The notice is void. You are not authorized to proceed with the eviction. I advise you to leave the premises immediately, or I will file a report for harassment. Camilla let out a high-pitched, frustrated shriek, tearing at the air as if she could claw my victory away. Her jaw dropped further as the sheriff, completely ignoring her, offered me a court-issued form for reporting property harassment. She had come here to make me homeless. Instead, she was publicly reprimanded by the local law and exposed as a petty bully. The sight of Camilla Hale, the Grand Society matriarch, storming back into her black sedan, completely defeated and humiliated by a single brighty, uninvited, tiny line on a map she thought was too insignificant to read, was infinitely satisfying. She had intended to destroy my home and my dignity. Instead, she drove away, knowing that my small-town intelligence had just voided her son's grand political maneuver. I knew then that my endurance, my patience to learn every useless detail about my father's seemingly small legacy, had paid off. The revenge was sweet, because it used the law they thought was their exclusive tool. But the real threat wasn't the eviction. It was the fact that Rexford now knew I wasn't stupid. Camilla's frantic call back to him would confirm that I had access to legal wisdom and the willingness to fight on technicalities. He would realize he couldn't win by force or law. His only option left was to destroy my reputation and use his political machine to turn the public against me. I may have saved my home today, but the price was showing my enemy I was prepared. That knowledge would fuel his next, more vicious attack. Rexford didn't waste time with formalities after his mother's disastrous eviction attempt. He recognized the threat I had unexpected intelligence. He shifted his attack from legal maneuvering to total character assassination. The political weapon he knew best. Within 24 hours, a major state political gossip blog, The Southern Scoop, posted a scathing piece targeting me. The headline called me "The Senator's Secret Shame, Clara Hale's Toxic Addiction Threatens Campaign." The post featured a series of highly edited, out-of-context photos. One was a picture of me 2 years ago, pale and exhausted, leaving a 2-hour hospital procedure that was draining for my physical health. The accompanying text suggested I was leaving an expensive, high-end detox clinic. Another photo, taken at a quiet, sentimental dinner with my late father, where I was holding a wine glass, was captioned with vile words, claiming I was a pathetic alcoholic gold digger who had bankrupted her small family and was now trying to ruin Rexford's legacy out of bitterness. Rexford's arrogance was nauseating. I remembered sitting through countless public relations meetings where he drilled into me the importance of the Hale name, demanding I maintain a perfect image, while I was sacrificing my reputation and physical well-being to uphold his perfect facade, keeping silent about his own financial missteps and infidelities. He was taking the photographs I had willingly shared with him and editing them into a weapon against me. The irony was suffocating. I had endured the gossip and the snide remarks of his inner circle, all to protect the stability of the name he now used to call me a drunk and a thief. The core of his attack was this: destroy her name, and her claim to the land means nothing. His public display of this calculated cruelty was the grand annual Governor's Charity Gala, held at the State Capitol Ballroom. This was his stage. He arrived with Veronica, his new fiancée, clinging to his arm. Veronica was sleek and cruel, the daughter of a key political donor, the very substance Rexford claimed I lacked. I entered the ballroom 20 minutes later. My dress simple, tailored, and perfectly appropriate. My calm was unnerving. I waited for the attack. It came swiftly. Veronica approached me first, pulling Rexford in her wake. She put a hand, the one flashing a ridiculous diamond ring, on my arm. Pity, radiating from her face like cheap perfume. Clara. Darling. This is so sad. Veronica cooed. Loud enough for the neighboring table of political heavyweights to hear. Rexford told me how concerned he was about your obvious drinking problem and the stress of the divorce. You're clearly confused. Trying to sue him over land. Maybe you should check into that lovely place in Malibu. For your health? Dear, you know nothing of our complex land deals. She was mocking my weakness, my alleged emotional instability, and my ignorance of real money and real power. Rexford stood beside her, his face a mask of faux concern, expecting me to stammer a defense, to show the slightest flicker of panic. He expected the political elite to dismiss me instantly, confirming his narrative that I was a bitter, desperate ex-wife. I simply looked past Veronica to Rexford, who gave me a subtle, smug, contemptuous smirk. It is sad. Veronica. I agreed calmly, but I'm not confused about the land. I'm confused about the source of this slander. Rexford's smirk widened. Clara. Please. The truth will come out eventually. Everyone knows the Southern Scoop is highly reliable. Indeed. I said. And I know the Southern Scoop is hosted on a server owned by a corporation called Delta Solutions, located in Tallahassee. Rexford's eyes narrowed. And you know that how? Exactly. Because, I replied, my voice cool and even. Delta Solutions is one of the 320 shell corporations my father's trust uses to manage our media holdings. And as of 45 minutes ago, I had my team terminate the lease of the person who runs the Southern Scoop. Rexford blinked. He couldn't process the information. He was still waiting for me to cry. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone. I didn't need to speak to the guests. The evidence would speak for itself. I had planned this 2 days ago. Immediately after I confirmed the blog's host server, I executed a pre-written command on my phone. The entire ballroom was equipped with multiple large digital screens displaying a rolling list of donors. All the screens simultaneously blinked, then refreshed. The Southern Scoop, which was being live-checked by countless guests, was now gone. In its place, on all the large screens, was a single, static legal notice, a document detailing the impending investigation into Rexford Hale's mortgage fraud and loan delinquency related to the Grand Citadel Construction Fund. The source of the fraud, the document explained, was his attempt to secure 2 construction loans against the same disputed land parcel. The effect was instantaneous. The silence wasn't just stunned, it was deadly. Veronica gasped, pulling her hand from Rexford's arm as if he were suddenly radioactive. She turned to her father, who was standing nearby, rigid with shock. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice high and panicked. "Is Rexford under investigation for mortgage fraud? We can't be associated with this." Rexford was defeated not by my words, but by the cold, undeniable, publicly broadcast evidence of his crimes, which came from a source he had relied on to publish his lies. The vile attempt to ruin my reputation as a drunken gold digger had been instantly and irrevocably replaced by the truth he was a financial criminal. His face was a mask of utter fury and panic. His humiliation was absolute. He had stood on the highest political stage in the state, expecting to destroy my credibility. And instead, I had used his own propaganda network to broadcast his downfall. The entire room, the entire political landscape, shifted in that single moment. I lowered my phone. I trust your media consumption is more reliable now. Rexford. I walked away from the ruined senator and his horrified fiancée. His narcissistic rage was already brewing. He realized I was not just smart. I had vast, hidden financial and media resources. He would be in a total panic. Knowing he couldn't beat me legally or socially, He would try one last, desperate attack to make me financially penniless, so I would have no choice but to settle. He would target the smallest, most visible income stream. I had my part-time job. He was about to make his final, most critical mistake. I will never forget the look on his face. The moment he realized the person he thought was his biggest fan was actually the architect of his demise. He tried to destroy my name with a lie. And I responded with a truth that will ruin his entire career. Rexford's humiliation at the gala, the very public exposure of his mortgage fraud, left him utterly frantic. He was reeling from the loss of his major investor and the flight of his sophisticated fiancée. He was losing control. And a man like Rexford, whose ego was built on control, became dangerous. He had tried law, and he had tried public slander, and both failed. His next logical, desperate move was to attack the only visible sign of my financial independence, my small, part-time job. For the past 3 years, I had worked as a personal assistant to a seemingly minor, retired investment manager named Mr. Blanke Davies. At a modest firm downtown, Rexford had always mocked this arrangement. I remembered him sneering at me after I missed one of his tedious campaign dinners because of a late shift. Honestly. Clara. Why bother? You're shuffling papers for a 5-figure salary. It's pathetic labor for a woman whose only job should be polishing my image. He saw the low salary and the mundane title, and he assumed my work was beneath him. That it was a pointless hobby for a wife who was too worthless to earn real money. But that part-time job was the genius of my preparation. While I was pretending to be a low-level assistant, the truth was that Mr. Davies was my late father's most trusted retainer and the visible face of the Vance Trust's local operations. My job was actually managing the trust's investments under a low-profile guise, ensuring Rexford never suspected the true scope of my power. My small salary was a cover, a sacrifice of my own time and energy to maintain the illusion of my poverty. Rexford's plan was simple: get me fired, make me penniless, and force me to accept his pathetic settlement offer. He used his remaining political influence to pressure Mr. People Davies. Rexford didn't call Davies directly, but he called the firm's main number, demanding to speak to the owner, gloating about the impending firing. Rexford assumed Davies would be terrified of the senator's power and comply immediately. He expected Davies to terminate me and then call him back to confirm the job was done, thus leaving me completely vulnerable. I was in Mr. Davies' office when the call came in. Davies, a loyal, silver-haired man who had known me since I was a child, gave me a knowing look. He put the call on speakerphone. Rexford's voice, though no longer a triumphant boom, was laced with venomous satisfaction. Mr. Davies, I presume I need you to terminate Clara Hale immediately. She is a woman of extremely poor moral character, now involved in a serious fraud investigation, and a liability to your reputation. Do this quickly, and I will ensure your firm receives a lucrative government contract. Mr. Davies remained silent, letting Rexford spew his poison. I need confirmation. Davies. Rexford pressed, a cruel edge in his voice. I want to hear that the peasant is finally begging on the street. She thinks she can fight me. I'm going to make her homeless and unemployed. I'll make her rue the day she decided to play games with me. He laughed. A short, ugly sound, clearly reveling in the thought of my total financial destruction. Rexford was so blinded by his own sense of entitlement and my supposed weakness that he never paused to ask why I worked for this seemingly minor firm. He believed his power could crush any little businessman. I stood up and walked to the desk. Standing right next to Mr. Davies, Rexford was expecting silence, compliance, and confirmation of my firing. Instead, Mr. Davies spoke into the phone, his voice measured and utterly professional. Senator Hale, I'm afraid I cannot comply with your request. Rexford's voice instantly went from gloating to aggressive. What are you threatening me? Davies, you think I won't ruin your little firm? Mr. Davies smiled calmly, then pushed a large leather-bound document across the desk for me to sign. It was the transfer of controlling interest. I picked up the pen and signed my full name, Clara Vance. Senator. Davies continued, the sound of my pen scratching against the paper audible through the speakerphone. I have absolutely no authority to fire Mrs. Hale. Why not? Because you're scared, Rexford demanded. No. Senator, because as of 45 seconds ago, I'm no longer the controlling partner of this firm, and I certainly can't fire the woman who now signs my checks. Mr. Davy posed, then delivered the final, chilling line, right as he stamped the document I had just signed. I can't fire her. Senator, she's my boss now. And her very first official act was to authorize a full, deep dive audit of every single Hale family campaign and personal account we manage. Have a terrible day. Senator. Rexford's side of the phone line went utterly silent. The triumphant air left the room, replaced by the dead, cold sound of a man who just realized his house of cards was about to be pulled apart piece by piece by the woman he thought was a worthless assistant. The attack meant to render me penniless had instead placed my hand directly on the throat of his entire financial structure. I looked at Mr. Davies. His eyes sparkled with the satisfaction of a job well done. Rexford didn't just fail to make me beg. He had just handed me the keys to his safe. Rexford now knew that not only did I have land, but I had a legitimate financial arm. His reaction would be one of total desperation. The action of a man who had nothing left to lose. He would sacrifice anyone, even his own family, to stay afloat. The only thing left for him to steal was his mother's last asset. I had spent 3 years enduring the contempt for my supposed lack of ambition. I tolerated the humiliation of the small salary and the mundane tasks, all to protect the asset that would ultimately bring him down. The contempt was brutal, but the payoff was absolute. He thought he was firing a secretary, but he just promoted his own executioner. The threat of a full audit by the firm I now controlled Rexford thought was powerless, plunged him into a state of blind, narcissistic desperation. He knew his political career depended entirely on maintaining the illusion of financial probity, and an audit would expose his myriad self-dealing schemes. He was losing all his allies, his investor, his fiancée, and his political credibility. There was only one financial lifeline left. He could steal his mother. Camilla's vacation home deed. Camilla was a miserly woman, but she trusted her son implicitly when it came to their legacy. The deed to her summer home, her most valuable personal asset, was locked in the safe in the Hale master study. I had anticipated this exact kind of desperate, internal betrayal before I left the main house 3 months ago. I had hired a specialist to install covert, high-resolution security cameras focused on the safe, the study entrance, and the filing cabinets. I called them my insurance policy, knowing Rexford would eventually sacrifice someone close to him. The clash came not at the firm, but in the polished marble lobby of the largest bank in the state, where Rexford was attempting to secure an emergency high-interest bridge loan. He planned to use Camilla's summer home as collateral, a fraudulent transaction that would buy him exactly 48 hours of false security. I was there with Mr. Davies, observing the transaction. Rexford was in a private office upstairs. Camilla, however, burst into the main lobby. Having just discovered the safe empty and the deed gone, she spotted me immediately and zeroed in. Her face contorted in a mask of betrayal and fury. She knew I was the source of his troubles, and she assumed I had masterminded this final theft. She marched directly toward me, her voice shrill enough to cut through the quiet professionalism of the bank. You vicious little serpent, you ruined my son and now you're stealing from me," she yelled, loud enough for a nearby vice president VP and 20 other customers to hear. "Return the deed. Clara, you are a thief and a destroyer of family," she shrieked, her voice thick with the bile of hypocrisy. This was the same woman who had mocked my sacrifices, who had called me a financial burden, who only knew how to take, now accusing me of being a thief because her own son had stolen from her. The vile contrast was overwhelming. I had spent 30 years of my life quietly protecting their family name and finances, only to be branded a destroyer by the very person who raised the thief. The bank VP and several customers stared, expecting me to be overwhelmed, to cower, or to meekly deny the accusation. Camilla expected her social standing to crush me publicly. I didn't cower. I didn't raise my voice. I waited for her to finish her tirade, my expression unmoving. I understand your distress, Camilla, I said calmly. It is horrible to be betrayed. She sneered. Betrayed? Don't pretend you care. You engineered this. I engineered the truth. I corrected. I had my phone connected to a small, portable projector hidden in my bag, which I immediately aimed at a large, neutral white wall near the bank's main display monitor. The image that instantly flashed onto the wall was a crystal-clear, time-stamped screenshot from my covert security footage. The image showed Rexford Hale, her beloved son, standing at the master safe, the light of his phone illuminating his face, and his hand pulling Camilla's deed from the lockbox at 3 o'clock that morning. The noise Camilla was making stopped abruptly. She stared at the image, her face going from crimson fury to an ashen, sickly white. The evidence was undeniable. Her son, the man she had championed and protected, the senator she believed was entitled to everything, had betrayed her most fundamentally, stealing her security to save his own skin. He had chosen money over family. The bank VP who had rushed over to intervene now stood frozen, witnessing the absolute destruction of the Hale family bond. Camilla, I said softly, the calm in my voice colder than any scream. I installed that camera, but I didn't make him open the safe. Your son did. Camilla made a small, choking sound. The sound of a woman who just realized she was completely and irrevocably ruined and isolated. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto a nearby velvet bench, her grand composure shattered by the single digital image. The damage was total. The bank VP immediately received a panicked call from upstairs and rushed back, only to return minutes later. Looking grim, he approached me. Mrs. Hale, all negotiations regarding the bridge loan for Senator Hale's company are officially terminated. We will also be filing a report on the suspected collateral fraud, he stated, his voice now deferential. Rexford's attempt to steal his mother's last asset had been immediately foiled and had resulted in the final total severance of his relationship with his mother and his last financial lifeline. I watched Camilla, the grande dame of Augusta, clutching her pearls, defeated, her son's betrayal broadcast publicly. He had just made his final, most disparate move, and it had cost him his only remaining advocate. Rexford had absolutely nothing left. No money, no fiancé, no political backing. And now, no mother. His only recourse would be a final, public spectacle at the project site itself. I had just driven him to the edge of madness. I walked away from the ruined scene, leaving Camilla weeping silently in the bank lobby. The only thing Rexford had left was the Grand Citadel construction site itself, a monument to his failure. He would attempt to save it with a grand, televised gesture. I would be ready to dismantle it, piece by piece. As the owner, Rexford was completely isolated. The public humiliation, the cancelled loan, the flight of his fiancée, and the betrayal of his own mother had cornered him. He was a senator whose only remaining asset was the appearance of power. To save that appearance, he decided on a final, desperate spectacle: the official, televised groundbreaking ceremony for the Grand Citadel Resort. He would ignore the title dispute, ignore the investigation, and simply force the project into existence, betting that a powerful public show would override any quiet legal technicality. I knew this was coming. A narcissist always doubles down when cornered. He was counting on the sheer audacity of the event, the huge crowds, the media coverage, the presence of local dignitaries to pressure me into backing down. He was expecting me to fight him in court after the ceremony, when the momentum would be on his side. What Rexford didn't know was that, as the silent owner of the land, I had pulled the rug out from under him 3 days ago. I had used my influence within the trust to secretly revoke the primary construction zoning permit through a discreet legal challenge based on the same historical easement I used to save my cabin. However, I deliberately allowed the small, temporary permit for the event itself to remain valid. I wanted him to build his stage, fill his audience, and raise his champagne glass one last time. The morning of the groundbreaking was crisp and beautiful, a cruel irony against the impending disaster. The site was teeming with press, cameras, and local politicians. Rexford stood on the temporary stage, bathed in the morning sun, his fake smile back in place. Flanked by his political acolytes, he looked directly into the camera, trying to recapture the old, authoritative Senator Hale image. He began his speech with a flourish, introducing his former fiancée, Veronica, who, surprisingly, had returned after a frantic call from her father. He spoke of new beginnings and dedicating the resort to a future free from the past's dead weight and petty squabbles. A clear, vicious insult aimed directly at me and my father's small-town legacy. He mocked my father's worthless small-town dreams and my lack of ambition. I watched from a quiet corner, my expression calm. I didn't need to be visible. The scene was set. Rexford's expectation was absolute triumph. He expected the cameras to flash, the political guests to applaud, and the sheer weight of this public victory to make my title claim irrelevant. He expected me to be watching, powerless, fuming with private rage. The moment came when he grabbed the giant, ceremonial chrome shovel, engraved with the Grand Citadel logo. He lifted it high above his head, ready for the iconic, career-defining plunge into the dirt. And with this shovel, Rexford boomed, his voice swelling with final, victorious pride. We turn the page and break ground on the future of this state. The flashbulbs erupted. The applause started. That was the twist. Just as the shovel was descending, a small, quiet man in a tailored, official suit, the county zoning director, walked onto the stage. He didn't rush or interrupt the speech. He simply stood next to Rexford, holding a small, official clipboard. Rexford, annoyed, lowered the shovel halfway, attempting to wave the man away. "Excuse me, sire. We are live on camera. Please step aside." The zoning director, a public servant who answered only to the law and now, secretly, to the Vance Trust's legal counsel, spoke into the microphone calmly. "Senator Hale, I apologize, but I must inform the public that I have been forced to issue a stop work order due to a failure to demonstrate clear title and the unauthorized demolition of a historical easement. The primary building permit is invalid." He paused, then delivered the fatal blow, his voice carrying clearly across the quieted crowd. "Therefore, Mr. Hale, proceeding with construction, even with this ceremonial shovel, would constitute a criminal violation of state zoning law." Rexford's triumphant face crumbled instantly. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the raw, devastating moment of his failure. The audience noise died completely. He had been hoping for applause, and he got a criminal warning instead. In a fit of blind rage, Rexford threw the chrome shovel to the ground. It landed with a loud, metallic clatter that echoed through the entire, stunned crowd. The live broadcast. Unable to handle the sudden chaos and the explicit mention of a criminal violation, cut abruptly to a commercial break. Rexford was left screaming voiceless curses at the zoning director. His carefully staged victory, transforming into an international scandal in real time. The devastation was absolute. His public career was now irrevocably tarnished by the specter of criminality and fraud. He had used the spectacle to save his reputation, and I had used the spectacle to destroy it completely. He was humiliated and exposed. Realizing his power meant nothing against the quiet, undeniable force of land law. He would believe I had used a local political contact to achieve this. He would never suspect I owned the land itself. I drove away from the site, leaving the chaos in my rearview mirror. Rexford would be looking for my political weakness now, attacking my connections. Since he had failed to find a legal or political friend, he would attack my father's legacy directly. Hoping to find a flaw in the foundation of the Vance Trust, he would escalate to a malicious tax audit, using his high-level contacts to try and bankrupt my father's worthless small-town estate. I was ready for that too. I had been waiting for the moment he would realize his entire life was built on sand. Now, he had nothing left but vindictive revenge. The failure of the groundbreaking ceremony, a public, televised disaster, confirmed Rexford's paranoia. He knew I had high-level contacts, but he still couldn't fathom the truth of my identity. He concluded that I must be weaponizing the supposed tax loopholes and shady dealings of my late father. Andrew Vance, a man Rexford had always publicly dismissed as a small-time rural developer. Rexford's reaction was immediate and highly malicious. He escalated to a political attack by triggering a full-scale IRS tax audit against the Vance Trust. He used his remaining political leverage to ensure the audit was comprehensive, vicious, and instantaneous. He planned to tie the trust up in legal knots and crippling fees, forcing me to deplete my resources on lawyers and ultimately bankrupting my foundation. I remembered his arrogance when discussing my father's legacy. Your father was a dirt farmer with a hammer and a prayer. Clara, I am a senator. We deal in real finance, real power. His small-town assets are worthless and likely fraudulent. He used those vile words to dismiss the very foundation of my inheritance. He believed the Vance Trust was an antiquated structure, too unsophisticated to withstand a modern political attack. He expected the audit to find something, anything to ruin me. While Rexford was gloating to his few remaining loyalists about how he was finally going to bankrupt the country bumpkin, I was prepared. I had anticipated this exact maneuver because Andrew Vance, my father, was not just a developer, he was a visionary. 3 years ago, I had worked quietly to convert the core of the Vance Trust into a sophisticated, ironclad legacy philanthropic foundation, designed specifically to be immune to political and malicious financial attacks. The moment the IRS documents landed on Mr. Davies' desk, we were ready. Rexford didn't wait for the audit to finish. He publicly announced the audit, holding a small press briefing where he stated that Andrew Vance was a small-time rural developer who cut corners, implying his assets were built on fraud, and that I was merely trying to hide his illicit gains. He expected the public to turn against my deceased father's name and pressure me into a settlement. I did not issue a statement defending the trust's legitimacy. I let the audit process begin. Rexford and the public expected the foundation to fold under the intense pressure of a federal investigation. The twist came the next day. I held my own press conference. Not about the audit, but about the foundation's mission. The Vance Philanthropic Foundation has always been committed to honest governance and public transparency. I announced, looking directly into the cameras. We welcome the audit, and we will comply fully. I paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the blow that destroyed his political life. To further ensure honest oversight in this state's development, and to show our commitment to clean governance, the Vance Philanthropic Foundation will immediately donate $100 million to the campaign fund of Rexford Hale's primary political rival. The effect was instantaneous and politically lethal. My action wasn't a defense, It was an act of aggression. I was using my father's worthless money to fund Rexford's political executioner. We believe this donation will ensure the state has the strong, honest leadership it needs to move past petty corruption and personal vendettas. I concluded, the statement hitting Rexford with maximum irony, as he was the one who initiated the audit. The payoff was immediate. Rexford's rival used the enormous, shocking donation to launch a devastating attack ad that very evening. The ad featured a split screen on one side, a clip of Rexford saying Andrew Vance was a small-time rural developer who cut corners, and on the other, a graphic showing the $100 million donation to the rival's campaign. The narration simply asked, is this the wealth of a tax cheat? Or the punishment for an honest one? Rexford's political career was instantly and irrevocably ruined. He had attempted to find a fraud in my family's foundation, and I used that attempt to fund his opponent's political victory. He was publicly shamed and exposed as an absolute political fraud. This immense political blow meant Rexford was now desperate for any form of revenge. Regardless of the consequences, he would no longer care about reputation. He would seek to hurt me physically. He would realize that Mr. Balderbaldes, Davies, the man who manages my visible assets, is the key to my hidden power. Rexford would escalate to a physical attack, ordering a sabotage against the only man he suspected was giving me information. I had spent my marriage enduring his vicious contempt for my family's paltry funds. I remember working for months to liquidate several non-performing assets of the trust, just to create that cash reserve. The shame of being told my family was cheap was the motive for the scale of this donation. Rexford thought he could weaponize the IRS. Instead, I turned my family's quiet, philanthropic strength into a political nuclear bomb that detonated right in his face. Rexford's political and financial destruction was swift and total. But the human animal, especially the arrogant one, seeks retribution, not surrender. After the public funding of his rival and the catastrophic failure of the tax audit, Rexford's desperation reached a dangerous new peak. He realized Mr. Davies, the senile old man who ran my investment firm, was the key to my operational power. Rexford believed that if he could eliminate Davies, I would lose my anchor and be forced to reveal my true resources too early. He escalated from political machinations to outright criminal sabotage. I remembered the vile things Rexford said about Mr. Davies, mocking his age and loyalty. That old relic Davies should be in a home, not shuffling your worthless paper. He's a liability. Glada. Just like your father's antiquated business model. This bezed Davies for his quiet, steadfast competence, and my father's old-fashioned values. The very values that built the ironclad trust. I had anticipated his physical attack. A cornered narcissist will always try to wound the people you care about most. My father's death was sudden and suspicious, which had taught me a harsh lesson about the ruthlessness of unchecked power. I had already quietly engaged a team of private security specialists months ago, not just to watch the physical assets of the trust, but to protect Mr. Davies, who often traveled alone between the office and my coastal cabin, where we discussed trust business. The attack came one rainy Tuesday morning. Rexford used a former, highly loyal campaign staffer, a man used to operating in the shadows, to attempt a sinister act sabotaging the brakes of Mr. Cripen, Davies's car, while it was parked at a downtown cafe. The goal was to silence Davies permanently, or, worse, to frame me for the accident. Using my recent legal battles as a motive, my security team was watching. They intercepted the staffer in the act. They didn't intervene publicly. They simply detained him and gathered the crucial evidence. Rexford, still believing he was untouchable and unaware that his staffer had been caught, went on the offensive. He issued a short, cold statement, denying any connection to the so-called vandalism, claiming that Davies was a senile old man who crashed his own car and that I was trying to frame him with fabricated evidence to win a settlement. He expected the media to dismiss the incident as an unsubstantiated conspiracy theory from a bitter ex-wife. He was counting on the sheer audacity of his lie to prevail. The twist came when I held a briefing later that afternoon. I didn't mention Rexford's statement, or even the sabotage. Instead, I released a single, chilling piece of evidence to the state police and the press, simultaneously infrared security footage captured by my security team. The footage was devastating. It showed the staffer performing the sabotage with meticulous detail, but the final seconds of the video were the killing blow the staffer. Immediately after finishing the criminal act, stepping aside and making a direct phone call to Rexford Hale's campaign office line, clearly confirming the completion of the job. The raw video proved two things. The crime was committed, and Rexford had directed it. Rexford's defense that Davies was just a confused old man was instantly invalidated. He was publicly implicated not just in a financial scandal, but in a conspiracy to commit bodily harm. The payoff was total and absolute. The state police immediately opened a criminal investigation. The remaining political allies vanished overnight. Leaving Rexford completely alone in the campaign office, he desperately clung to. He was a senator facing imminent criminal charges. All because he underestimated my commitment to protecting the people who were loyal to me. He had intended to remove my anchor. I had instead used the attack to place him under criminal indictment. I had spent my marriage enduring his vicious disregard for my intelligence. He assumed I was too naive to understand the need for protection, too sentimental to use ruthless tactics. His mistake was assuming my calmness meant stupidity. He was wrong. The security was a cold, a hard logic I put in place out of respect for my father, who had been similarly targeted. Rexford now knew I would retaliate with criminal evidence. Not just legal documents. He was facing the very real possibility of prison. He would try one last, desperate attempt to flee the jurisdiction, using his only remaining, secret financial asset to fund his escape. I would be waiting for that too. Facing imminent criminal charges for conspiracy to commit bodily harm, and with his entire financial structure under my audit, Rexford's political career was dead. The police had already visited his campaign office. There was only one final, desperate and predictable move left: flee the jurisdiction. His ultimate arrogance lay in believing he could escape the consequences of his actions by simply crossing a border. I remembered the arrogance with which he once boasted about his secret safety net. 3 years ago, he'd bragged while planning a lavish, unneeded European trip for Veronica. The truly smart money isn't here, Clara. It's untouchable. I have $10 million sitting in a private account in the Caymans. You can take the house, but you can't touch my real money. You poor, foolish woman. He had mocked my intelligence, believing I couldn't possibly understand the intricacies of offshore finance, seeing my financial expertise as nothing more than balancing a simple checkbook. The humiliation was deeply personal. While I was struggling to sell off some minor trust assets to stabilize his campaign debt, he was siphoning off millions to the Caymans, calling my efforts worthless and amateurish. I had endured that contempt, knowing that his belief in the sanctity of his secret wealth was the final layer of his delusion. Rexford's plan was to charter a private jet to the Cayman Islands that evening. He called me in the late afternoon, his voice a mixture of frantic, panic, and final, bitter gloating. He was expecting to be untraceable. Clara, you win the game of local politics and petty revenge. He spat into the phone. But I win the life. I'm leaving this state. And there's nothing your little trust can do to touch my real money. You can't touch what you can't see. Enjoy your shack and your small-time victory. You vengeful witch. He was waiting for me to beg him to stay, to admit defeat, to show fear that he would escape justice. I didn't argue. I didn't show panic. My voice was calm, utterly professional. The voice of the global CEO. He didn't know I was. I know the bank. Rexford, I replied, cutting off his gloating. It's the first global reserve in Georgetown. A solid choice. Usually. His voice hitched. How do you know that? It doesn't matter, I said, What matters is that while your $10 million is beyond the reach of the local Southern State Police, that particular bank, due to its secondary holdings in London, must comply with a certain European Union money laundering regulation that I just happened to trigger an hour ago. This was the twist. As a high-level strategist for the Vance Global Hedge Fund, my true, ultimate identity, I knew the precise, obscure compliance loophole of that specific offshore institution. I had quietly, through an international legal team, filed a request based on suspicious activity, which forced the bank into an immediate, mandatory anti-money laundering review. Your money is not frozen by the state of Georgia. Rexford, I explained, the words cold. Hard facts. It's frozen by the International Compliance Division. Your funds are now pending a mandatory 6-month review, and you cannot legally access 1 cent of it. You can't even pay for your jet fuel. The payoff was a sound more satisfying than any scream, a broken, strangled cry, followed by absolute, dead silence on the line. Rexford realized that the secret millions he had mocked me over the money he had sacrificed everything to protect was now useless, inaccessible, and utterly out of his control. He was standing on the tarmac, ready to escape, only to find he was financially paralyzed, completely broke, and facing criminal charges in the state he couldn't leave. His escape attempt was foiled, not by a local sheriff, but by an arcane international financial law I understood, a complexity far beyond his shallow political knowledge. He had spent years telling me I couldn't handle real finance, and I had just used the most sophisticated financial weapon in my arsenal to render him a non-entity. His utter paralysis meant he had to return into he would be broke, cornered, and completely unhinged. The criminal would resort to one final, pathetic emotional spectacle, a public confrontation where he would try to beg and force me into a settlement by appealing to my heart. He would try to use sentimentality, the one thing he always accused me of having too much of, as his final weapon. I may have saved my future, but the final, devastating payment was making him realize that all his secret plots were transparent to me. He thought he was untouchable. I used my secret knowledge to prove he was merely pathetic. Rexford's attempt to flee failed miserably, leaving him broke, unhinged, and trapped in the state where he faced criminal charges. His desperation culminated in one final, frantic, public spectacle, a forced emotional settlement attempt. He returned to the only venue he still felt entitled to, his campaign headquarters, and orchestrated a chaotic, unscheduled press conference. He brought his disgraced mother, Camilla, who now looked fragile and bewildered, clearly intending to use his broken family as emotional blackmail. I remembered the countless times Rexford had mocked sentimentality, declaring, "Emotional weakness is for peasants. Clara, we deal in logic and leverage." He had always called me a woman with too much heart and no sense of business, believing my compassion would be my downfall. Now, he was hypocritically wielding the very emotional knife he had spent years trying to twist in me. I arrived at the scene with Mr. Kaida, Davies, and a quiet security detail. The atmosphere was a circus, a few remaining loyalists, a flock of journalists hungry for a crash. And Rexford, his face gaunt, his tie undone, standing next to a shell-shocked Camilla. The attack was brutal and immediate. Rexford pointed at me, his voice cracking with feigned vulnerability. "Clara Hale is destroying my family legacy. She has no heart. She has become a vindictive, soulless woman who abandoned her marriage, vows to satisfy a petty vendetta." He wanted the media and the onlookers to pity him, to see him as the victim of a cold, unforgiving ex-wife. Camilla tried to chime in, offering weak, tearful pleas about saving the children's legacy, though we had no children. Rexford's expectation was simple, under the intense pressure of public scrutiny and the emotional pleas of his mother. I would falter, show mercy, and sign a settlement to make the noise stop. He believed my deep-seated aversion to conflict would make me fold. I didn't utter a word. I didn't engage in the emotional debate. I had a different document. A different kind of authority. The twist came when I simply nodded to my security team, who stepped forward and delivered a formal notice to the few remaining campaign staffers. I then walked to the edge of the crowd, facing the reporters, and spoke calmly. Not as a desperate wife, but as the owner, Senator Hale and Mrs. Pointu. Camilla Hale are currently standing on property that is in legal violation of its commercial lease. I announced, the voice of authority cutting through the chaos. As of 10 minutes ago, the Vance Trust has legally exercised its right of lease termination and seized immediate possession of this building. The reporters stopped taking notes. Stunned, Rexford's mouth dropped open. He realized the humiliation was not a request, it was an eviction. I then delivered the true, poetic payoff. My voice clear and cold. The Vance Trust is now pleased to announce that this property, the former campaign headquarters for Senator Hale, will be immediately converted into a women's empowerment and financial literacy center in honor of Andrew Vance. The payoff was absolute and public. Rexford shrieked, a sound of pure agony, realizing his final stand was being turned into a monument to his failure. Camilla began sobbing uncontrollably. My security team, professional and swift, escorted the utterly defeated senator and his mother out of the building. They collapsed onto the sidewalk in front of the flashing cameras, exiled from the very symbol of the power they had wielded for years. His campaign headquarters, the space where he had mocked my useless soft skills and declared his divorce, was being transformed into a center dedicated to giving women the financial power he believed they were too foolish to possess. The irony was devastating. The reactive escalation was now guaranteed. Rexford was financially dead, criminally implicated, and now physically exiled from his last refuge. The political mistress, Veronica, who had briefly reappeared, would immediately realize Rexford was a sinking ship. She would try to save herself by betraying him, seeking favor from the new, true power in the state, the Vance Trust. I watched him struggle on the asphalt. He had spent years telling me I had no substance, no power, and no future without him. He was right about one thing: the pain of betrayal is immense, but he failed to realize that pain, when channeled correctly, becomes the coldest, hardest steel. I had just used his arrogance to fund my own future. Rexford's public eviction from his own campaign office sealed his fate, transforming him from a powerful senator into a destitute criminal facing charges. This total collapse immediately triggered the self-preservation instinct of the political mistress, Veronica. She had momentarily returned for the groundbreaking ceremony, but now she wanted nothing to do with a man whose name was synonymous with fraud and physical violence. She sought a new sponsor, believing that by betraying Rexford, she could win favor with the Vance Trust, the new power in the state. Veronica contacted me, feigning remorse, and arranged a private meeting. She was expecting to be rewarded for revealing some secret information about Rexford's campaign finance fraud. I remembered the cruel words Veronica had used at the gala, twisting the knife by saying Rexford called me emotionally bankrupt and too soft for the real world. She had seen my quiet composure as a weakness that proved I was unfit for politics or finance. The pain was not in the insult itself, but in the fact that it came after years of me silently bearing the emotional burden of Rexford's ambition. While Veronica was attempting to play the role of the virtuous informer, I was fully aware that she had been actively siphoning funds from Rexford's remaining campaign war chest for her own purposes. I had already gathered the evidence during my financial firm's audit. My endurance wasn't based on naivete. It was based on the cynical understanding that all of them, Rexford, Camilla, and Veronica, were predictable criminals. The attack was disguised as a genuine apology. Veronica sat across from me, looking earnest. Clara, you made a mistake. Rexford is unstable. I'm willing to give you everything I know about his offshore transactions and hidden accounts. I want to help you put him away." She then twisted the emotional knife, just as Rexford had taught her. "He always said you were too kind to follow through on the final destruction. That you'd break down before the end." Veronica's expectation was that I would be grateful for the information, reward her with a financial sum, and welcome her as an ally. She believed the shared trauma would bind us. I listened politely, letting her finish her entire confession. I then picked up my phone, my expression utterly calm, showing none of the softness she claimed I possessed. "Veronica, thank you for coming," I said. "The information you provided is already well documented, but I appreciate the sentiment." This was the twist. I didn't reveal my evidence of her theft immediately. Instead, I opened a file on my phone and showed her a screenshot, a crystal-clear image of a recent campaign finance transfer request, initiated by her own encrypted email, moving $50,000 into a personal trust account she had opened in the Bahamas. The transaction occurred last week. "I can't reward you, Veronica," I continued, my voice cold and firm, "because you are not an informer. You are a co-conspirator. You were using the money from Rexford's campaign to fund your escape, and as the new chairwoman of the financial firm that managed those accounts, I have all the records." The payoff was instantaneous and chilling. Veronica's face went slack with shock, the realization dawning that she had just confessed to a ruthlessly prepared enemy. I wasn't her friend or even a victim. I was the financial authority who had been watching her every move. "I am turning over all evidence of your campaign finance theft to the Federal Elections Commission this afternoon," I stated, delivering the final blow. "You sought to gain favor by betraying Rexford. Instead, you have simply ensured your own prosecution." Veronica didn't plead or argue. She bolted, realizing she had traded one sinking ship for a shark tank. The elimination of the mistress, who was his last emotional and financial distraction, meant Rexford was now truly alone and forced to rely on his final legal maneuver, the formal title dispute hearing. He had expected me to collapse emotionally under her apology. I used my weakness, my quiet attention to detail, to expose her crime. This incident underscored his ultimate flaw. He believed the women in his life were either fools or trophies, never the actual financial architects. Now, with no allies left, the senator had to face the court. The elimination of Veronica, coupled with the threat of criminal charges and financial ruin, meant Rexford had to play his last card, the formal title dispute hearing in court. This was the final legal battle over the 27 acres of land that formed the core of the Grand Citadel project, the land he had mortgaged everything on, the land he didn't legally own. He had no money for proper counsel, so he was forced to act as his own attorney, a sure sign of his utter desperation. I remembered the countless times Rexford had condescended to me about legal matters. "You wouldn't understand the title complexities, Clara. They are beyond your scope. Your father's deeds are all backwoods." Coin. And easily dismissed by a real judge, he had mocked the simple, yet meticulous, nature of my father's original documentation, believing that anything not handled by a giant corporate law firm was worthless. His arrogance was complete. He thought the system he gamed for so long would always protect him. While I was meticulously compiling the original land trust documents, the very deeds he dismissed as quaint Rexford was spending his days trying to intimidate me and my associates. I had endured his arrogance, knowing that the simplicity of my father's documents was their greatest strength, not a weakness. The courtroom was small and stuffy. Rexford, sweating slightly in a suit that looked too tight, stood before the judge. His eyes were wild, darting between the bench and me. He planned a final, grand public humiliation. The attack came when Rexford called me to the stand. He didn't ask about the trust's finances. He went for the jugular, my father's reputation. "Tell the court, Mrs. Hale," Rexford demanded, his voice dropping into a theatrical, mocking tone. "Who is Andrew Vance? A dirt farmer, a tax cheat, you have no legacy, your father was nothing. and you are nothing without me. You claim this land. But your entire family history is a lie. He believed that by destroying my father's memory in front of the court, he could destabilize me and invalidate the entire trust. Rexford's expectation was that I would break down, defend my father's honor emotionally, or struggle with the legal intricacies of the trust. He thought the complexity of the trust documents would be enough to confuse the judge. I looked at him. My composure, absolute. I didn't defend my father's character. I used the paperwork. Senator Hale, I replied calmly, I did not come here to discuss character. I came here to discuss ownership. This was the twist. I didn't answer his question. Instead, I instructed my attorney, Mr. Davies, to present a set of documents to the judge. They weren't the complex trust documents. They were the original title receipts from the largest title insurance company in the state, dating back 10 years, confirming the legal chain of title. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman who had overseen the county for decades, took the documents and scanned them quickly. Her expression, usually neutral, hardened immediately. She looked up at Rexford with palpable irritation. Mr. Hale, the judge said, her voice dry and precise. Is this signature on the bottom of this title receipt familiar to you? Rexford frowned. Walking to the bench, he looked at the signature on the decade-old document, and his face drained of all remaining color. The payoff was absolute, delivered by the judge herself. It appears, Mr. Hale, the judge stated, tapping the signature, that the original title transfer, which certified the legality of the Andrew Vance Trust's ownership, was signed and certified by me 10 years ago. When I was still a practicing partner at your firm, the title is clear, and the paperwork is impeccable. The judge didn't need to hear anything else. Rexford's malicious attack on my father's legacy had just been personally invalidated by the judge's own history. She immediately dismissed Rexford's claim as vexatious litigation, ruling that the trust's ownership was undisputed. Rexford stood there, completely ruined, defeated by a piece of paper that bore the signature of the one person he couldn't bully. He had expected to destroy my father's name and my composure. Instead, he had only angered the person who controlled his legal destiny. The reactive escalation was now purely emotional. Having failed to find a legal or criminal way out, Rexford would resort to the ultimate hypocrisy, public emotional blackmail. He would post a tearful, "Desperate video," begging for forgiveness and a loan, hoping to appeal to the pity of the public and the compassion he always mocked me for having. I had to prepare for the final, disgusting plea. I watched Rexford Hale, the once powerful senator, being quietly escorted from the courtroom. Utterly broken, he had underestimated the meticulousness of my father, and in doing so, he had sealed his own fate. His arrogance was his executioner. The court's dismissal of Rexford's title claim, confirmed by the judge's personal validation of my father's documents, stripped him of his last legal defense. He was a cornered animal with no money, no allies, and a looming criminal investigation. His final recourse was the ultimate, nauseating hypocrisy, public emotional blackmail. He recorded and posted a tearful, shaky video online, targeting the audience's pity. He dressed it up as an apology, but it was purely manipulative. He wept, apologizing for his recent personal turmoil and blaming the divorce for his breakdown. He claimed I was being manipulated, and that he only needed a small emergency bridge loan of $5 million from my secret funds to save his life's work. The Grand Citadel. I remembered his smug dismissiveness. For years, he'd mocked public sentiment, calling it a lever for the weak and telling me, "Never let them see you sweat." Clara, sentimentality is cheap and will always be exploited. He despised vulnerability. Now, he was weaponizing the very weakness he scorned, attempting to exploit the public's compassion and my own deep-seated aversion to conflict. While Rexford's video was trending, appealing directly to my softness and pleading for a loan, I was preparing to announce the Vance Trust's true, global power move. He expected me to cave to the emotional pressure, or at least to release a statement defending myself. I ignored the video completely. I let the public debate rage, allowing his emotional manipulation to reach its zenith. The twist was orchestrated with the brutal precision of a financial coup. While Rexford's video was still circulating and the public was debating whether to pity the senator, the state's largest financial news network suddenly interrupted its scheduled programming with a breaking news alert. The anchor announced breaking the Vance Trust, recently revealed as the state's largest real estate holder, is poised to acquire Thornton Capital, the regional bank holding the majority of Senator Rexford Hale's highly toxic Grand Citadel construction loans. This wasn't a legal threat or a social attack. It was a financial takeover. The payoff was devastating. Rexford's tearful video was instantly rendered meaningless. He didn't just need a $5 million loan. He was about to lose the entire project to the woman he was begging for mercy. He realized, in that crushing moment, that I wasn't merely taking his land. I was about to become the owner of his debt. I would control the terms of his complete and total financial destruction. The acquisition of the bank meant I now had absolute, undeniable authority. The Grand Citadel project was not merely contested, it was bankrupt and about to be foreclosed upon by the owner of the debt. The final collapse was now inevitable, and it would be utterly public. His emotional blackmail had failed. He had sought pity, and I responded by buying his entire mortgage. The contempt he showed for my soft heart was the motivation for the hardest, coldest business decision of my life. I had to endure his pathetic pleas, knowing that every tear he shed was a calculated lie. The acquisition was the only way to ensure he could never again manipulate a financial system to save himself. The reactive escalation was now the final, ultimate showdown. The acquisition set the stage for the literal foreclosure of the construction site. Rexford, left with nothing, would attempt one last, disparate, physical confrontation at the site, forcing me to reveal my true global identity and authority in front of the entire state. I had spent my life enduring his arrogance. Now, he was about to endure the final, crushing consequence of his own greed. The acquisition of Thornton Capital, the bank that held Rexford's toxic construction debt, was the final, inescapable financial chokehold. Rexford, now facing both criminal charges and imminent bankruptcy, had only one option left: deny reality and stage a final, dramatic physical confrontation at the Grand Citadel construction site. He was going to use his remaining political influence to physically bar the foreclosure agents from the property, believing a powerful senator could still override a bureaucratic order. I remembered the countless times Rexford had humiliated me by belittling my wealth. "You play with monopoly money, Clara," he'd sneered. "While I move millions, you're a vengeful, small-town bitch who thinks a few acres of marshland make you powerful." He thought financial power was about bravado, not meticulous legal ownership. I had endured the contempt of being called small town because I knew the true scope of my global fund was incomprehensible to him. The attack was chaotic. Rexford and a few remaining lackeys tried to physically block the foreclosure agents sent by my newly acquired bank. He screamed at the cameras, claiming the foreclosure documents were fake, part of a ruthless, personal vendetta launched by his bitter ex-wife. His arrogance was still intact. He believed the spectacle would win the day. Rexford's expectation was that the agents and the small security detail would back down. Fearing a public confrontation with a senator, he expected me to be watching from afar, unwilling to dirty my hands with the physical mess. But I was ready for the final, ultimate reveal. I arrived at the site, not alone, but flanked by Mr. Davies and a high-level delegation. My composure was absolute. The twist came when I didn't argue with Rexford or his lackeys. I simply waited for the current governor of the state, the mayor of the county seat, and the chief of police to step out of their black sedans. They walked directly toward me, bypassing Rexford entirely. The governor then stepped forward, facing the cameras and the stunned crowd, and spoke clearly. He didn't introduce me as Rexford's ex-wife. He introduced me as the chairwoman of the Vance Thornton Global Fund. "I am pleased today," the governor announced, shaking my hand firmly for the cameras, "to welcome the new chairwoman of the largest investment fund in this state, Clara Vance, who has taken control of this project. Her vision will transform this land into a community asset, a far surpassing the failures of its previous owner." The payoff was absolute and devastating. Rexford Hale, the former senator, the supposed pillar of power, was forced to watch as the highest-ranking political officials in the state publicly endorsed his ex-wife and her new global entity. His name was replaced by mine. The final insult came when the chief of police, who had been waiting for the governor's signal, walked up to Rexford. "Senator Hale," the chief stated, his voice flat, "you are in violation of a court-issued foreclosure order and obstructing justice. You are under arrest." Rexford shrieked. Struggling as the handcuffs were placed on his wrists, he was arrested. Not by a local beat cop, but by the police chief, while watching his entire life's ambition, the land, the power, and the legacy be handed over to the woman he had called a peasant. He was physically detained, a humiliated spectacle for the entire state to see. The final irony was complete. He had used his political connections to wage war against me, and I used my global financial power to ensure that those same connections became the final executioners of his career. He was destroyed by the very system he thought he controlled. The reactive escalation was now impossible. Rexford had lost everything: freedom, career, and money. The only thing left was the personal, final, agonizing confrontation, the confession of regret. The moment a beggar must face the queen, I had to face him one last time to deliver the final, cold line that would destroy his soul completely. I had endured the relentless verbal abuse about my supposed lack of status and my small-town roots. The satisfaction of seeing the governor introduce me as the chairwoman of a global fund was worth every second of that endured contempt. He thought he was untouchable. I proved he was merely disposable. Rexford was released from custody 36 hours after his public arrest, now utterly destroyed. Without money, power, or prospects, his career was annihilated. I, meanwhile, was ready for the final act, the true, grand reveal of my identity, and the ultimate, cold confrontation. I held my first major interview as the chairwoman of the Vance Thornton Global Fund, choosing a highly symbolic location, the newly inaugurated Women's Empowerment and Financial Literacy Center, which was Rexford's former campaign headquarters. The irony was palpable. The place where he once dictated the terms of his power was now dedicated to liberating the women he believed were too foolish to understand finance. I was wearing a simple, elegant black dress, and around my neck, I wore the priceless heirloom necklace, a rare piece made of South Carolina sea glass and antique gold that my late father had given me. It was the same necklace Camilla had once dismissed as tacky costume jewelry, suitable only for a country bumpkin. I had endured that humiliation, knowing the true sentimental and financial value of the piece was far beyond their comprehension. I knew the necklace itself represented the quiet, underestimated wealth of the Vance family. The attack came when Rexford crashed the live interview. He slipped past the outer security, bursting into the center, his clothes disheveled, his eyes desperate and unfocused. He threw himself onto the floor at my feet, right in front of the television cameras and the assembled journalists. He grabbed my ankles, his voice a choked, disgusting parody of his former senatorial tone. "My love, my anchor Clara, please. I made a terrible mistake. I deserve to be punished. But don't destroy my life. You have to save me. Give me a junior position at the trust, just enough to pay my lawyers. Don't abandon me. My darling, He was calling me my darling and my love, trying to use the intimacy he had long discarded as a weapon of manipulation. He expected the audience's pity to force my mercy. I pulled my feet back calmly, my expression not hateful, but utterly devoid of recognition. He was expecting the old, compliant wife. He was looking at the global CEO. I waited until he had finished his pathetic begging. This was the final twist. I didn't need to argue about love or forgiveness. I used the necklace he had mocked. I reached up and touched the sea glass pendant, looking directly into the primary camera. Senator Hale seems confused, I stated, my voice cold, calm, and utterly final. He is begging me for a junior position, but he has been employed by me for 3 years. The journalists gasped. The truth is, I continued, the Vance Trust quietly bought the majority of his campaign debt 2 years ago to prevent a public scandal before my father's trust fully transferred to me. He has been financially beholden to the trust and therefore to me ever since. He didn't know it, but every major campaign decision he made, every check he signed, was financially approved by my team. The entire room realized the truth. Rexford had been my puppet for years, moving his pieces on a board I controlled, all while mocking me for my worthless, simple life. The humiliation of the necklace, the symbol of the wealth he scorned, became the proof of his servitude. The payoff was the delivery of my final line, the culmination of years of endured contempt and sacrifice. I looked down at the ruined man kneeling at my feet. His entire universe collapsed into a single, desperate, pathetic plea. Rexford Hale, I said, my voice steady, delivering the final, cold truth. The only thing you own now is the regret you feel right now. I signaled my security team. They quietly and efficiently escorted the sobbing, broken former senator out of the center, his pleas for forgiveness melting into meaningless noise. I turned back to the camera, touching the necklace one last time. I had endured the contempt of being called a country bumpkin, of having my love called weakness, and my family called worthless. I had used my father's worthless simple title to steal his land, my worthless small firm to seize his debt, and my worthless composure to watch him break. Rexford lost everything because he fundamentally misunderstood the nature of power. He believed it was loud, arrogant, and public. I knew it was quiet, patient, and absolutely ruthless. In securing the final foreclosure, I didn't just reclaim the land, I reclaimed myself. The peasant was now the queen.